Why does a seashell look like a symphony? That's a weird question, isn't it? A seashell is hard, spiral, a little home for a snail. A symphony is waves of sound, crafted by humans with violins, horns, and maybe a tired conductor who really wants a coffee. They seem like completely different things, but here's the trick. Both of them, in their own way, are built on patterns, and those patterns are mathematical. That's the connection we are going to explore. Beauty, whether it is in a seashell or a cathedral or a piano sonata, is never truly random. It feels mysterious, it feels emotional, but hiding underneath, there is a quiet rhythm of numbers. You might not see it at first, you might not even want to see it. Some people get nervous when the word math shows up, but relax, this is not homework. This is not the kind of math that makes you break out in a cold sweat and wonder if you accidentally signed up for engineering school. No, this is math as a lullaby. Imagine the world is whispering to you in patterns. A sunflower whispers through its spirals. A piece of music whispers through its harmony. Even your own heartbeat keeps time with a secret ratio. It's not math with equations on a chalkboard. It's math as the hidden language of beauty. And when you start to see it, you realize that the universe might be one giant piece of art, painted with numbers. Of course, humans have been obsessed with this idea for thousands of years. From the very first time someone banged two sticks together and thought, hey, that sounds nice, we've been trying to figure out why some things feel beautiful and others do not. Why a face looks pleasing, why a chord feels harmonious, why a building makes us gasp when we step inside. The mystery of beauty is one of the oldest puzzles in philosophy. And guess who kept crashing the party? Mathematicians. Because they couldn't resist saying, wait a minute, maybe beauty is not just taste. Maybe there's a hidden code. Now I should warn you. Mathematicians, bless their hearts, are a little like cats. They see patterns everywhere. You know how cats stare at nothing and act like they've just spotted a ghost? That's mathematicians, but with numbers. They look at a pine cone and say, ah yes, Fibonacci. They look at a face and say golden ratio. They look at a pizza and say geometry of circles. It's a little ridiculous, but at the same time they have a point. There really are repeating patterns all over nature, all over human culture, that come back to mathematics. And this brings us back to our seashell and our symphony. Both are organized. A seashell grows in a spiral, each new curve built on the last, according to a steady ratio. A symphony grows in themes, movements, harmonies, each part connected to the others by musical mathematics. They are completely different things. One is snail real estate, the other is high culture, but both of them obey rules that make them feel right, balanced, satisfying. Now don't worry, this is not one of those stories where I am going to tell you that every single thing beautiful is secretly a golden rectangle. You know those clickbait articles? Did you know your favorite celebrity's face is perfect because it matches the golden ratio? Yeah, that's fun for a meme, but the truth is a lot messier and also a lot more interesting. Beauty is not one single formula. It's a playground of patterns. Some we can measure, some we can feel, and some we can't explain at all, which is why we still argue about modern art. Here's a fun fact. The ancient Greeks thought beauty and goodness were the same thing. They even had one word for it, kalokagathia. If something looked balanced, harmonious, it was also morally good, which means according to them, a perfectly symmetric nose made you a better person. Not sure how well that theory holds up, but it shows how deep this connection between beauty and proportion ran. For them, numbers were not just tools for counting sheep. Numbers were the skeleton of reality. And honestly, they were not wrong. Think about music. If you stretch a string and pluck it, it makes a sound. If you cut the string in half and pluck it again, the sound is the same note but higher. That's math. That's ratios. Your ears like it because it's simple fractions vibrating through the air. And even if you never studied music theory, your brain is a secret mathematician. It can feel when things are in proportion. It can feel when notes clash. It's doing the math without you even noticing. This is the strange connection we are going to wander through in this video. How math hides inside music, art, architecture, faces, flowers, even chaos. We'll meet philosophers who thought beauty was a moral law. We'll meet composers who built symphonies like equations. We'll meet artists who embraced geometry, and then artists who embraced geometry, and then artists who said no thanks and smashed it to pieces. And through all of it, we'll keep asking the same question. Is beauty really in the eye of the beholder, or is it quietly humming to us through mathematics? Now, I have to say, if you are already getting sleepy, that's perfect. That's the point of this channel. You can drift off while I ramble about Pythagoras arguing with his students over string lengths. You can dream while I explain why Islamic art looks like an infinite kaleidoscope. You can nod off while I rant about Instagram filters and golden ratios. It doesn't matter. The math will still be here when you wake up. It always is. Numbers are patient like that. But if you are still awake, let me tempt you. In the next chapter, we are going to time travel back to ancient Greece, to a man with a triangle obsession, Pythagoras. He believed numbers were not just useful. He believed numbers were the essence of reality. He thought the planets themselves sang in harmony, like a giant cosmic orchestra, which is either beautiful or completely nuts depending on your mood. But either way, it's a story worth hearing. So get comfortable, because the seashell and the symphony are just the beginning. We are about to find out how far down the rabbit hole of beauty and mathematics goes, and it is a very deep rabbit hole indeed. Let's meet one of the most interesting and frankly weirdest characters in the entire history of mathematics. His name was Pythagoras. Yes, the same guy you probably remember from school for that right triangle thing, A quadrate plus B quadrate, C quadrate. If your math teacher was in a good mood, maybe they explained it with a nice diagram. If they were in a bad mood, maybe they just slapped the formula on the board and said learn it. But here's the thing, Pythagoras was not just about triangles. He was more like a mix between a rock star, a cult leader, a philosopher, and maybe a wellness influencer who got really carried away with geometry. Pythagoras lived around 500 years before Christ in ancient Greece, but he didn't just sit around doing math on his own. No, he started an actual brotherhood, a group of followers who treated numbers almost like a religion. They believed numbers had mystical powers, they had secret rules, secret handshakes, and believe it or not, they even had dietary restrictions based on numbers. For example, they refused to eat beans. Why beans? No one is completely sure. Maybe beans gave them bad gas, which is not very harmonious. Or maybe they thought beans looked too much like little human embryos. Either way, no beans allowed. The Pythagoreans, as they were called, believed that numbers were not just tools. Numbers were the essence of reality. The planets moved according to numbers. The soul was structured by numbers. The universe itself was, in their view, a kind of giant mathematical song, and Pythagoras was the frontman of this cosmic band. Now, how did he come up with this idea of music in numbers? There's a story. One day Pythagoras was walking past a blacksmith's workshop. The blacksmiths were hammering metal, and he noticed something strange. Some hammers sounded good together, like harmonious notes. Others clashed, like bad karaoke. Being a curious guy, he investigated. He found that the harmonious hammers had weights related by simple ratios, twice as heavy, 3 times as heavy. Things like that. Numbers again. This story might be apocryphal, meaning it's probably not true, but it's a great image. Pythagoras creeping around blacksmith shops, listening to hammers. Anyway, whether or not that story happened, what we do know is that Pythagoras experimented with strings. He discovered that if you pluck a string, it makes a sound. If you make the string half as long, the note goes up an octave. If you make it 2/3 the length, you get a perfect fifth. These are musical intervals that sound beautiful to our ears, and all of them are based on simple fractions, 1/2, 2/3, 3/4. Suddenly, harmony was not just a matter of taste, it was math. To the Pythagoreans, this was proof. Beauty, at least in music, was nothing more than numbers vibrating. And if that was true for a lute string, maybe it was true for everything. The planets, for example. They believed the planets were arranged in perfect ratios, that as they moved, they created an inaudible music, a cosmic symphony that held the universe together. They called it the music of the spheres. It's a lovely idea, even if the physics doesn't check out. Today we know planets are not quietly humming in harmony. They're just giant rocks spinning in space, but the poetry of it still resonates. Think about how radical that idea was, that the entire universe could be explained by numbers. Today we take it for granted. Physics is built on math, but 2,500 years ago, that was a revolutionary claim. The world was not random, not chaos. It was structured, elegant, even musical, and Pythagoras was one of the first to say it out loud. Now, I don't want to paint too rosy a picture of him. Pythagoras also had some, let's say, eccentric beliefs. For one, he claimed he could remember all his past lives. In one of them, he was supposedly a Trojan warrior. In another, a fisherman. This is the kind of thing you might hear at a party at 3 a.m., right before someone starts strumming a guitar and telling you that the universe is love. But for Pythagoras, this was serious philosophy. He and his followers believed in reincarnation. They thought the soul itself was tied to mathematical harmony, and after death it would move on, like a melody-shifting key. And here's another fun one. The Pythagoreans were obsessed with whole numbers and ratios. They thought everything could be explained with fractions. But then, disaster. They discovered something terrifying. Some numbers cannot be expressed as fractions. Like the square root of 2. It's an irrational number, meaning it goes on forever. No pattern, no neat ratio. This broke their worldview. According to legend, when a Pythagorean named Hippasus revealed the existence of irrational numbers, the other members were so horrified that they drowned him at sea. Imagine that. Death by math. All because a number refused to play by the rules. Of course, whether that story is true is debated, but it shows how deep their obsession with mathematical beauty went. To them, harmony and proportion were sacred. Anything that didn't fit was dangerous, ugly, even heretical. And yet, despite the cultish quirks, the Pythagoreans gave us something incredible. They gave us the idea that the world could be understood through math, that harmony in music, balance in art, proportion in architecture, all these things might be reflections of numerical laws. That's a powerful thought. It means beauty is not just in the eye of the beholder. It might be in the equations that govern reality itself. Think about how that idea echoes today. Modern physics still talks about elegance. A beautiful equation is one that is simple, balanced, and powerful. Einstein himself said that the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. He didn't mean mysterious as in spooky. He meant the kind of mysterious that comes from glimpsing the hidden order of the universe. That's pure Pythagoras. So the next time you hear a chord that gives you chills, or you see a sunset that feels too perfect to be real, you can thank Pythagoras for planting the seed. He might have been eccentric. He might have banned beans for reasons lost to history, but he gave us the idea that beauty is numbers in disguise. In the next chapter, we'll move from Greece to the ancient temples of Egypt, India, and beyond. We'll see how geometry was used not just to make buildings stand, but to make them feel divine, because if Pythagoras heard music in the planets, then the temple builders carved mathematics into stone, and that is a different kind of symphony altogether. So far we've talked about seashells, symphonies, and one very eccentric Greek with a bean problem. Now let's step into the world of temples, pyramids, and sacred spaces, because it turns out math was not only used to play with triangles and lute strings, it was also used to design places where people thought they could meet the gods. And if you're going to meet the gods, you don't want the math to be sloppy. You want your temple to feel eternal, balanced, and just a little intimidating. The ancient Egyptians were masters of this. Think of the pyramids, enormous stone mountains, each block heavier than a car, stacked with insane precision. Archaeologists still argue about how exactly they managed it. Ramps, pulleys, aliens. Okay, maybe not aliens, but that theory keeps showing up on late-night TV. What we do know is that the proportions of the pyramids weren't random. They were built with deliberate geometry. For example, the Great Pyramid of Giza has proportions that some scholars say reflect the golden ratio. The slope of the sides is almost exactly what you'd get if you built a triangle around that mysterious number phi. Did the Egyptians know about the golden ratio? Maybe, maybe not. Historians argue about it. Some say they stumbled on it by accident while trying to make things stable. Others say they absolutely knew and used it as a symbol of harmony. Either way, standing in front of a pyramid feels like standing in front of a frozen equation. The sheer balance of it makes your brain whisper, "This is right, this is beautiful." And they weren't the only ones. Travel a little east and you get to India, where Hindu temples are like geometry set on fire. The ground plans of many temples are based on mandalas, geometric diagrams representing the cosmos, squares, circles, and concentric patterns radiating outward, each with symbolic meaning. To walk through such a temple is to literally walk through math turned into stone. Every step carries you deeper into a carefully designed symmetry that is supposed to lead you closer to the divine. It's not random decoration, it's proportions, ratios, angles, a mathematical journey disguised as spirituality. The Greeks, of course, couldn't resist making math sacred either. Take the Parthenon in Athens, a masterpiece of proportion, columns spaced just so, angles adjusted so that from far away, everything looks perfectly straight. Here's the fun part. The columns are actually a little curved. If they were perfectly straight, your eyes would see them as bending outward. Optical illusion. The Greeks, being geometry nerds, figured this out and corrected it. So the Parthenon is a temple that tricks your brain into thinking it's straighter than it really is, which is kind of hilarious. Even the gods needed a little math-based Photoshop. But the Greeks took it further. They believed that certain ratios were not just pleasing, but sacred. The golden ratio again shows up in their architecture, their sculptures, even in the way they planned their cities. To them, math was the link between human art and divine perfection. Build according to number, and you were in tune with the cosmos. And then, of course, there were the Mayans, over in the Americas. Their pyramids were stair-stepped instead of smooth, but the math was still there. One famous temple, El Castillo at Chichen Itza, is basically a calendar in stone. Each side has 91 steps. Add them all up with the top platform and you get 365, the number of days in a solar year. Twice a year, during the equinoxes, the shadow of the sun makes a serpent appear crawling down the steps. That's geometry, astronomy, and showmanship, all rolled into one. Imagine going to a religious festival and the temple itself turns into a giant cosmic puppet show. That's sacred geometry at work. So why all this obsession with math in temples? Well, think about it. If you believe the universe has a hidden order, then what better way to show respect than to copy that order in the places where you worship? Math is eternal. Stones crumble, empires fall, but numbers don't change. A triangle is always a triangle. So by building with math, ancient architects were trying to anchor themselves to eternity, to touch the divine by aligning with the universe's hidden code. There's also the psychological side. Humans love symmetry. Walk into a building with perfect proportions and your brain immediately relaxes. It feels right. Your neurons are secretly doing geometry in the background, even if you have no idea what the golden ratio is. That's why so many temples and churches around the world use geometry to guide your eyes upward toward the heavens. Pointed arches, spirals, domes that seem to float. It's math designed to make you feel small, humble, but also connected to something vast. Of course, not every attempt at sacred geometry worked out perfectly. There are stories of temples collapsing because someone got a measurement wrong. Imagine being the poor architect who has to explain that to a furious king. Yes, your majesty, the divine plan was flawless, but unfortunately the divine plan did not account for termites. Oops. Even sacred math can't fight bad materials. Still, the idea that math was divine architecture persisted for centuries. Even in medieval Europe, cathedral builders used elaborate geometry to design rose windows, spires, and labyrinths on the floor. Every angle, every ratio had symbolic meaning. Circles represented eternity. Squares represented the earthly world. Put them together, and you had heaven and earth meeting in stone. It's like a PowerPoint presentation for God, but in stained glass. What's fascinating is how universal this was. Egyptians, Greeks, Hindus, Mayans, Christians, all these cultures separated by oceans and centuries, all turned to math when they wanted to express the sacred. Different religions, same instinct. Beauty as a bridge between humans and the divine, and math as the blueprint for that bridge. Now, was all of this really about math, or are we just modern nerds reading too much into it? That's the eternal debate. Some scholars argue that a lot of the golden ratio claims are exaggerated, that people just like to find phi everywhere because it sounds mystical. And yes, sometimes that's true. People have claimed the golden ratio appears in everything from the Mona Lisa to random stock photos. Some of those claims are stretching it. But even if the specifics are messy, the big picture is clear. Ancient people saw numbers as more than tools. They saw them as the language of the gods. So next time you see a grand old temple or a cathedral, look closer. Behind the statues, behind the candles, there is geometry quietly holding the whole thing together. Circles, squares, spirals. Math, hiding in plain sight, shaping how you feel without you even noticing. In the next chapter, we're going to meet the golden ratio itself, phi, a number that has driven mathematicians, artists, and conspiracy theorists equally mad. A number that people claim is the secret to beauty. Spoiler alert, it's not quite that simple, but the stories that swirl around phi are just too good to ignore. And yes, we will make fun of the idea that your sandwich has the golden ratio. Now we arrive at one of the most famous numbers in the history of beauty, phi, also known as the golden ratio, the supposed magic code of the universe, the number that has been called divine, mysterious, and occasionally complete nonsense. It's been linked to the pyramids, the Parthenon, the Mona Lisa, seashells, spiral galaxies, and yes, even the stock market. People see it everywhere. Sometimes it's really there. Sometimes it's more like looking at clouds and insisting one of them looks like Elvis. So what exactly is this golden ratio? In simple terms, it's a number that comes out to about 1.618. Not very exciting at first glance, but here's how it works. Imagine you have a line and you want to divide it into two parts, a long bit and a short bit. The golden ratio is when the whole line divided by the longer part is the same as the longer part divided by the shorter part. Congratulations, you've just described one of the most famous proportions in history. Basically, it's a fancy way of saying some things look extra nice when they're in this particular ratio. Now, the golden ratio has been hyped for centuries. The Renaissance really ran with it. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, architects, even book printers believed it was the key to harmony. According to legend, Da Vinci used it when drawing the Vitruvian Man, that famous sketch of a man standing inside a circle and a square, looking like he's auditioning for a very uncomfortable yoga class. Whether he really used phi or not is debatable, but the story stuck. And then there's the claim that the Parthenon in Athens was designed using the golden ratio. This is one of those myths that won't die. People love to draw rectangles around the Parthenon and shout, "Look, phi." But here's the catch. Historians argue about whether the Greeks actually knew about the golden ratio. Some say yes, they worshipped it. Others say no, modern people are just forcing the number onto ancient buildings because we want them to look more mystical. The truth is probably somewhere in between. The Greeks definitely cared about proportion, but whether they cared specifically about 1.618 is less certain. What we do know is that mathematicians officially discovered this ratio thousands of years ago. Euclid, the great Greek geometer, described it in his book Elements around 300 BCE. He called it the extreme and mean ratio. Not the catchiest name, which is probably why nobody put it on Instagram back then. Later on in the 19th century, it got the nickname golden. Because, well, golden sounds fancier than extreme and mean. Imagine trying to sell a self-help book called The Extreme and Mean Ratio Diet. Doesn't quite work. But here's where things get fun. People started seeing the golden ratio everywhere. In seashells, in hurricanes, in sunflowers. The spiral pattern in a sunflower's seeds really does follow Fibonacci numbers, which are closely related to phi. That part is legit. Nature loves spirals, and phi shows up often in those spirals because it's a very efficient way to pack things together. If you're a sunflower, phi is basically the IKEA manual for seed placement. Then came the wilder claims that your body is beautiful if your navel divides your height in the golden ratio, that your face is attractive if your mouth, nose and eyes all line up with phi rectangles. There's even software that measures your selfie and tells you if your face is golden ratio approved. Spoiler alert, most people fail, but don't feel bad. Even celebrities fail. The number is picky, and honestly it's a bit silly. Real human beauty is way too complicated to boil down to a single decimal number. Imagine rejecting a date because their forehead wasn't 1.618 times their nose. Not a great strategy. Still, the obsession continued. Painters like Salvador Dali used the golden ratio in his works, sometimes in very obvious ways. He literally painted a giant canvas called the Sacrament of the Last Supper, where the whole thing is inside a golden rectangle. If nothing else, he wanted you to know he was in on the joke. And in modern times, phi has become a kind of mathematical celebrity. You can find YouTube videos claiming that the golden ratio is proof of intelligent design, evidence of aliens, or the secret to getting rich in Bitcoin. It's been turned into a mystical symbol of perfection, even though the reality is both simpler and messier. Sometimes phi shows up naturally, sometimes humans deliberately use it, and sometimes people just force it in because they want it to be there. So what's the reality? Is phi really the secret to beauty? Not exactly. It's more like one tool in a giant toolbox of proportions. Yes, certain rectangles and spirals based on phi look pleasing to us. Yes, nature uses similar spirals because they're efficient. But beauty is not one size fits all. Your favorite song doesn't sound good because of phi. Your favorite painting doesn't move you because of phi. Phi is cool, but it's not the wizard behind the curtain. What is true, though, is that the golden ratio has inspired humans for centuries to think about the link between math and beauty. It's like a doorway. Walk through it and you start noticing other patterns. Fibonacci numbers, symmetry, fractals. It gets you thinking. Maybe the world really does have a hidden order. Maybe beauty isn't random. And maybe, just maybe, that seashell on the beach is humming a quiet mathematical tune. Personally, I think the best part of phi is how much fun it is to argue about. Some mathematicians roll their eyes and say it's overrated. Others defend it like it's their favourite sports team. And artists, well, some embrace it, some ignore it, which is perfect, because it means the golden ratio is not just a number, it's a conversation, a never-ending debate between math, art, and human imagination. So the next time someone tells you their face is perfect because of the golden ratio, smile politely, then ask them if their sandwich also has the golden ratio, because apparently people see it in sandwiches too. Math is beautiful, yes, but it can also be a little ridiculous. In the next chapter, we'll shift gears. We're leaving the world of rectangles and spirals and moving into pure sound. Music itself. We'll explore why notes are really just fractions, why your brain loves simple ratios, and how harmony is just math dressed up as emotion. It's time to listen to the hidden numbers behind the music. Let's talk about music. Sweet, beautiful, emotional music. The kind of thing that makes people cry at weddings, scream at concerts, and occasionally dance badly at family gatherings. We tend to think of music as pure art, a thing of feeling, a thing of culture, something you enjoy, not something you calculate. But here's the secret. Behind every note you love, behind every melody that gets stuck in your head, there are fractions quietly at work. Notes at their core are nothing but vibrations. When you pluck a guitar string, or hit a piano key, or sing in the shower, what's happening is simple physics. The air vibrates. Those vibrations hit your eardrum. Your brain interprets the frequency as sound. Higher frequency, higher note. Lower frequency, lower note. That's it. Music is just organized vibrations, which sounds unromantic, but stick with me, because here's where it gets cool. The notes we call harmonious, the ones that sound good together, are the ones whose frequencies are related by simple ratios, fractions. If one string vibrates twice as fast as another, you get an octave. That's the most basic harmony in the world. It feels so natural that just about every culture on Earth discovered it independently. Double the frequency, double the pleasure. Now, if one string vibrates 3 times while another vibrates twice, that's a 3-to-2 ratio. Your ears hear it as a perfect fifth. Beautiful, strong, stable. Add a 4-to-3 ratio, and you get a perfect fourth. Put enough of these simple fractions together, and suddenly you're playing chords. You've gone from lonely notes to full harmony. Congratulations, you've just built the foundation of Western music theory without even opening a textbook. It's almost unfair how much your brain loves these fractions. Play a note, then play another. That's a simple ratio away, and your brain goes, ah, that's nice. Play 2 notes with messy ratios like 23-17, and your brain goes, make it stop. Dissonance. Which is funny because in math class nobody ever told you fractions could make you feel something, but here they do. This is why the ancient Pythagoreans were so excited when they discovered the link between strings and numbers. It was like uncovering the cheat codes to music. They realized that what sounded good wasn't just taste or culture, it was math. Ratios you could write down, prove, replicate. And of course, once humans discovered that, we started building entire musical systems out of fractions. Let's take an example you probably know, the major scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Sounds simple, right? But the spacing between those notes is not random. It comes from stacking up those pure fractions, fifths and fourths in a clever way. That's how we end up with scales that feel balanced. Each step in the scale is chosen so that the ratios aren't too messy, and your ears complain. Just right, and you can build everything from Beethoven to Beyoncé. Of course, not every culture picked the same fractions. Chinese music, Indian ragas, Middle Eastern maqams, they all have different systems of tuning, some based on slightly different ratios, which proves 2 things. First, humans love to experiment. Second, beauty in music is partly universal and partly cultural. The octave feels right everywhere, but the exact notes you pick in between, that's where culture does its magic. Now, here's where things get tricky. As beautiful as fractions are, they don't always fit together perfectly. For example, if you stack 12 perfect fifths, mathematically, you should land exactly 7 octaves higher, but in reality, the math doesn't line up. You end up slightly off. This problem haunted musicians for centuries. They called it the Pythagorean comma, which sounds like a weird punctuation mark, but it's actually a tiny mismatch in tuning. Imagine building an entire cathedral and discovering at the very top the last stone doesn't quite fit. That was music. So how did we fix it? By cheating, of course. Musicians invented systems of tuning where they adjusted the notes just a little bit, spreading the error around so no single interval was too painful. The most famous of these is called equal temperament. In this system, the octave is divided into 12 equal steps. It's not perfect math anymore, but it's good enough that you can play in any key without making dogs howl. Equal temperament is why your modern piano can play Chopin in C-sharp minor and still sound great. This compromise shows something fascinating about the relationship between math and beauty. Pure math says one thing, but our ears, our emotions, our creativity sometimes demand something different. We bend the rules, we fudge the numbers, we make the fractions slightly dirty, and somehow the result is more beautiful. Perfection isn't always perfect. And yet, even with all the fudging, the foundation of music is still mathematical. Every time you listen to your favorite song, you're bathing in ratios. Your brain is constantly decoding fractions, whether you know it or not. That guitar riff you love, that piano chord that makes you tear up, that bass line that makes you dance, it's all vibrations, and those vibrations are just numbers shaking the air. Here's a fun anecdote. In the 17th century, a scientist named Marin Mersum, sometimes called the father of acoustics, spent years trying to measure exactly how strings vibrated. He worked out formulas that are still used today. He was so obsessed with music and math that people nicknamed him the French Pythagoras, which, honestly, sounds like a great band name. Imagine a group of mathematicians with electric guitars calling themselves the French Pythagoras. I'd buy that album. And it's not just scientists and mathematicians. Composers themselves have always been aware of the math. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, they all played with structure, proportion, symmetry. They didn't need calculators to know that certain patterns just worked. They could feel it. But behind that feeling was the hidden logic of ratios. So next time you hear a simple melody, hum it, and then try to notice the intervals, the distance between the notes. Odds are, they're fractions in disguise. The music feels effortless, emotional, even spiritual. But beneath it all, it's numbers dancing with time. In the next chapter, we'll dive deeper into that dance. We'll see how Bach himself turned music into something like an algorithm, building fugues that feel almost like machines made of sound. Because if fractions are the bones of music, then composers like Bach turned those bones into living, breathing creatures. And they did it with math so beautiful it almost feels divine. When people talk about math in music, one name comes up again and again: Johann Sebastian Bach. If fractions are the bones of music, then Bach was the architect who built entire cathedrals out of them. He wasn't just a composer, he was an engineer of sound, a craftsman who turned patterns into emotion. If Pythagoras was the first to say music is numbers, then Bach was the one who said yes, and let me show you what numbers can really do. Now, Bach lived in the early 1700s. Picture powdered wigs, candlelight, and an endless supply of organ pipes. He wasn't a famous celebrity in his own time. He was mostly known as a hard-working church musician with far too many children, 20 of them to be exact. Yes, 20. I don't know how he had time to compose anything with 20 kids running around. Maybe that explains why he spent so much time hiding in the organ loft. But Bach's music is astonishing because it's built like a machine. Take the fugue, his favourite playground. A fugue starts with a theme, a simple melody. Then Bach layers it with another voice and another, each one entering like a puzzle piece. They chase each other around, overlap, invert, stretch, shrink, flip upside down. It's like musical Lego, except the Lego set is infinite and somehow also makes you cry when you hear it. To understand how algorithmic Bach was, think about this. You could write a simple rule for a fugue. Start with a melody, copy it in a different voice, add another, change the rhythm, flip it, repeat. These are exactly the kinds of rules that computers follow today, algorithms. And yet Bach was doing it centuries before the first computer existed. He was basically coding in sound. One of the most famous examples is The Art of Fugue. Bach never even finished it, but it's a collection of pieces where he takes one simple theme and pushes it through every possible transformation. It's like watching a mathematician squeeze a formula until every last pattern falls out. Some scholars call it the greatest puzzle in music history. Others call it the nerdiest mixtape ever written. Either way, it shows how much math lived inside Bach's creativity. And here's the thing. Bach didn't just do this because it was clever. He did it because it was beautiful. There's a strange joy in hearing patterns repeat, overlap and resolve. Your brain, secretly a little mathematician, loves the symmetry. It's satisfying, like watching dominoes fall in perfect sequence, or like solving a Rubik's Cube, but with your ears. Of course, not everyone saw Bach as a genius at the time. Some people thought he was too complicated, too mathematical, not emotional enough. One critic even said his music was like a tangled thicket of notes, which, to be fair, is true, but sometimes beauty hides in the thicket. Today, those same fugues are studied not just by musicians, but by mathematicians and computer scientists. In fact, some of the earliest experiments in computer-generated music used Bach's rules. Programmers fed fugue structures into machines and watched them spit out melodies that sounded eerily Bach-like. It's almost as if Bach was sitting there 3 centuries earlier, beta-testing algorithmic music. Here's a fun anecdote. In 1747, Bach visited King Frederick the Great of Prussia. The king, who liked to show off, gave Bach a ridiculously tricky melody and challenged him to improvise a fugue on the spot. Most people would have panicked. Bach smiled, sat down, and immediately wove the melody into a 3-part fugue like it was nothing. Then he went home and spent weeks turning that same melody into an entire collection called The Musical Offering. That's like being challenged to a rap battle, improvising flawlessly, and then releasing a full album the next month, all built on mathematical transformations. And yet, despite all the math, Bach's music never feels cold. It feels alive, spiritual, emotional. That's the paradox. His rules, his ratios, his algorithms were just scaffolding. Inside them he poured soul. It's proof that math doesn't have to be dry. Math can be the skeleton on which beauty hangs, the invisible grid that lets emotion shine brighter. Think of it this way. Bach's fugues are like kaleidoscopes. A kaleidoscope is just mirrors and angles, nothing but geometry. But when you look through it, you get endless patterns of colour that make you gasp. Bach used musical mirrors. He flipped melodies upside down, reversed them, stretched them. The math gave the structure, and the structure gave rise to beauty. Some modern composers have taken this even further. They use actual algorithms to generate music. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it sounds like a robot having a midlife crisis. But the attempt is pure Bach. Write down rules, follow them, see what happens. Computers today can compose fugues, and they sound pretty convincing. But even then, when you listen closely, you realize the difference. Bach wasn't just following rules. He was bending them, breaking them, making jokes with them. His music is mathematical, yes, but also playful. Here's the best part. You don't need to know any of this to enjoy Bach. You don't have to sit there calculating ratios while listening to the organ. Your brain does it for you. It hears the symmetry, the proportion, the repetition. It feels the satisfaction when the notes resolve. It relaxes into the patterns like a hammock. You might even fall asleep to it, which, on this channel, I consider a success. So next time you hear Bach, remember this. You are listening to one of the earliest algorithm designers in history. A man who turned math into music and music into math. A man who proved that order can be emotional, that patterns can move you to tears, and who, in between composing, also somehow managed to raise 20 children. Truly a multitasking legend. In the next chapter, we'll shift from order to chaos, because not all music is neat and algorithmic. Some music thrives on unpredictability, syncopation, randomness, improvisation, jazz, the kind of math that looks messy but still works, or as mathematicians like to call it, stochastic processes. Musicians call it simply playing cool. So far we've talked about harmony, order, and Bach building musical cathedrals out of rules. But now let's throw the rules out the window, or at least bend them until they squeak. Because there's a whole other side to music. one that thrives on unpredictability, surprise, even chaos, and no style shows that better than jazz. Jazz is the music of syncopation, improvisation, and endless experimentation. Where Bach carefully layered themes like an architect stacking bricks, jazz musicians toss the bricks in the air and somehow make them land in rhythm. It's messy, it's playful, it's alive. And yet, here's the kicker, there's still math underneath. It's just a different kind of math. Less geometry, more probability. Less structure, more chaos theory. Let's start with rhythm. In most Western classical music, the beat is neat. You can march to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, nice and steady. Jazz, on the other hand, loves to play tricks. It uses syncopation, which means putting accents where you don't expect them. Imagine you're walking down the street and suddenly the sidewalk tilts. That's syncopation. It makes the music feel alive because it keeps you off balance, and your brain, weirdly enough, loves that little jolt of surprise. Then there's improvisation. This is jazz's secret weapon. Instead of sticking to a written score, musicians invent on the spot. One player takes a theme, twists it, flips it, adds a flourish. Another answers back. It's like musical conversation. Sometimes it's smooth, sometimes it's messy, sometimes it sounds like two saxophones arguing in a bar. But underneath it all, there's still structure. Jazz players know the chord progressions, the scales, the timing. They're not just smashing keys randomly. They're using probability and instinct to choose the next note. Mathematicians have a fancy word for this kind of thing, stochastic processes. In plain English, that just means systems with randomness, but not total randomness. Think of rolling dice, but with some rules about how the dice are weighted. That's jazz. It feels free, but it's guided by hidden boundaries. The randomness has shape. Here's a fun image. Imagine jazz as a drunk mathematician walking home. They're stumbling left and right, but they still roughly know the direction. They'll get there eventually, but the path will be full of swerves and surprises. That's what improvisation is. Not chaos without order, but chaos that dances inside order. And this is why jazz feels so human. Life itself is improvisation. We make plans, sure, but then we improvise around them. Miss the bus, spill your coffee, meet a stranger. Life syncopates you constantly. Jazz captures that feeling in sound, which is maybe why so many people describe it as the sound of freedom. Now, let's talk about numbers. Even in jazz, the math shows up. Rhythms can be broken down into ratios. Triplets, quintuplets, polyrhythms. These are just fractions in disguise, layered on top of each other. Some African drumming traditions use rhythms so complex that when jazz musicians borrowed them, Western listeners thought it was chaos. But when you actually analyze it, it's intricate math, precise as clockwork. Just not the kind of clock we're used to. There's also fractal-like behavior in jazz improvisation. The musician takes a small phrase and repeats it, but slightly changed, then repeats again with another twist. Over time, the pattern grows, like a fractal zooming outward. The details keep changing, but the shape feels consistent. That's why a long jazz solo can feel like both chaos and coherence at the same time. One of the greatest improvisers of all time was Charlie Parker, nicknamed Bird. He could take a simple melody and transform it into a whirlwind of notes, each choice unexpected, yet somehow perfect. Musicians who studied his solos later realized he was cycling through patterns that can actually be described mathematically. Ratios of time, structures of scales, symmetry and rhythm. Bird wasn't sitting there with a calculator, of course. He felt it. But the math was there all the same. And here's where it gets really fun. Scientists have actually studied jazz improvisation with brain scans. They put jazz pianists into MRI machines, which by the way sounds like the most uncomfortable concert in history, and asked them to improvise. What they found is that during improvisation, the brain regions linked to self-monitoring shut down, while the regions linked to creativity light up. In other words, when you improvise, you turn off the little inner critic who says don't play that, you'll sound stupid, and instead let patterns flow freely. It's a mathematical stream of consciousness. But even when the brain is in free flow, math sneaks in. Studies of the timing in jazz solos show fractal patterns, little clusters of notes that repeat at different scales. It's the same kind of structure you find in coastlines and clouds. Beauty in chaos, numbers hiding in the mess. Of course, not everyone loves jazz. Some people hear it and say this sounds like a cat running across a piano. Fair enough. Jazz can be challenging. It asks you to let go of neat expectations. But once you do, it rewards you with moments of surprise that feel electric. That shock of, oh, I didn't see that coming, but it works. It's the musical equivalent of a plot twist. And plot twists, as any Netflix binge watcher knows, are addictive. So is jazz really mathematical? Yes and no. The surface feels wild, unpredictable, almost lawless. But dig deeper and you find structure. Fractions, probabilities, patterns of repetition. It's not the clean math of Bach. It's the messy math of real life. And maybe that's why it resonates. Think about it like this. If Bach is a perfect cathedral, jazz is a busy city street. Noisy, chaotic, unpredictable, but somehow alive in a way that a cathedral can never be. Both are beautiful. Both are math. Just different flavors of it. So the next time you hear a jazz solo, don't panic. Don't try to count every note or decode every rhythm. Just smile and think, somewhere in there, hidden in the chaos, are fractions and probabilities dancing together. And maybe that's why it feels so human. In the next chapter, we'll leave the world of sound and step into sight. Because if music is math you can hear, then art is math you can see. We'll look at how perspective changed painting forever, how geometry sneaks into canvases, and why artists sometimes rebel against the grid entirely. Welcome to the geometry of seeing. Music is math you can hear, but art, painting, architecture, that's math you can see. And one of the biggest breakthroughs in art history came when someone finally asked a very simple question. Why does my drawing of a building look flat and weird, while the building itself looks deep and real? The answer, of course, was geometry, perspective. For thousands of years, artists did their best to capture the world around them. The ancient Egyptians, for example, had a very distinctive style. If you've ever seen their wall paintings, you know the look. People in profile, shoulders facing forward, eyes staring straight at you. It's iconic, but not realistic. The goal wasn't to make it look real. The goal was to show what was important. Pharaohs are bigger than everyone else. Not because they ate more carbs, but because size meant status. Perspective wasn't about geometry, it was about storytelling. The Greeks and Romans got a little closer to realism. Some of their frescoes show attempts at depth, with overlapping shapes and angled lines, but it was still more guesswork than geometry. After the fall of Rome, European art drifted back toward flatness. Medieval paintings are beautiful, but perspective wasn't their strong suit. Jesus and the saints float in gold backgrounds, majestic but very much two-dimensional. If you wanted 3D, you had to wait a few centuries. And then came the Renaissance. Florence, 1400s. Enter Filippo Brunelleschi, an architect who basically said, all right, enough of this flat nonsense, let's use math. According to legend, he stood in front of the baptistry of Florence, held up a painted panel of the building, and drilled a tiny hole through it. By looking through the hole at a mirror, he could align the real building with his painting. The result, his picture looked convincingly 3D. For the first time in centuries, art had cracked the code of depth. The trick was simple but revolutionary. Parallel lines, when they extend far into the distance, appear to meet at a single point, the vanishing point. Think of railroad tracks. In reality, the tracks never meet, but to your eyes they seem to converge on the horizon. Brunelleschi realized you could use geometry to plot this effect on a flat surface. Suddenly, artists had a system. They could paint rooms, streets, and buildings that looked like you could walk straight into them. Perspective spread like wildfire. Artists like Masaccio, Donatello, and eventually Leonardo da Vinci all ran with it. In Masaccio's fresco, The Holy Trinity, you can see the illusion perfectly. The barrel-vaulted ceiling above the figures stretches back in space. It feels like you're looking into a chapel that doesn't exist. That's not divine intervention, that's geometry. Leonardo, being Leonardo, took it even further. He wrote pages of notes about perspective, optics, and how the eye perceives space. He wasn't content just to paint. He wanted to understand the math of vision itself, which, to be honest, sounds exactly like him. The man couldn't buy groceries without sketching a new invention. Perspective didn't just make paintings look cooler, it changed how people thought about art. Suddenly, the canvas wasn't just a flat decoration, it was a window into another world. You could create the illusion of infinite space on a finite surface. That blew people's minds. Imagine living your whole life surrounded by flat icons, and then one day someone shows you a painting where the walls stretch back forever. It must have felt like virtual reality, but with better fashion. Of course, like all mathematical tools, perspective came with rules. Lines must meet at vanishing points. Objects shrink with distance. Proportions have to be calculated carefully. It was basically an artist's version of doing math homework. Some artists loved it. Others rebelled. But for a while, perspective dominated European art. Every serious painter had to learn the geometry of seeing. And it wasn't just Europe. Islamic art, for example, often avoided realistic perspective for religious reasons, but it still embraced geometry in a different way. Intricate patterns, tessellations, endless symmetries. Instead of creating depth, Islamic artists created infinity on a flat plane. Different culture, different math, but the same instinct. Beauty through structure. Perspective also leaked into architecture. Architects began designing buildings with careful alignments, creating dramatic vistas where everything points to a central spot. Stand in front of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome and look down the long avenue. The whole design funnels your eye straight to the dome. That's vanishing point architecture, making you feel small and humbled before the divine. It's sacred geometry with a dash of stagecraft. Now, I should point out, perspective wasn't always used responsibly. Some artists got a little too excited. They crammed their paintings with so many receding lines that the poor viewer felt like they were being sucked into a geometric wormhole. Others used forced perspective in architecture, building roads or courtyards that looked grand and endless, but were actually short and stubby, basically optical illusions. Imagine walking into a courtyard that looks enormous from the front, only to realize it's about the size of your garage. That's perspective being cheeky. But whether subtle or flashy, perspective forever linked geometry and beauty. It taught us that the eye can be tricked, guided, and satisfied by mathematical rules, that even something as emotional as art can rest on invisible grids. And here's the funny thing. Once perspective became mainstream, artists eventually got bored of it. By the time of the 20th century, painters like Picasso said, "Perspective is old news, let's smash it." Cubism threw the rules out and showed multiple perspectives at once. Abstract art said, "Who needs vanishing points?" But even those rebellions were part of the same dance. To break the rules, you first have to know them. So next time you see a painting that looks incredibly realistic, remember it's not just talent, it's math. Vanishing points, ratios, angles, artists, whether they admitted it or not, were doing geometry on canvas. In the next chapter, we'll zoom in on one of the most famous patterns of all, the spiral. From seashells to hurricanes, from sunflowers to Salvador Dali, the Fibonacci spiral has enchanted people for centuries. Is it really nature's favorite design? Or are we just obsessed with finding spirals where they don't belong? Let's find out. If perspective is geometry's way of tricking your eyes, the spiral is math's way of hypnotizing you. Few patterns have captured human imagination quite like the Fibonacci spiral. It shows up in nature, in art, in architecture, and sometimes even in conspiracy theories. People call it mystical, divine, even proof that the universe has a secret design plan. Others roll their eyes and say, "Calm down, it's just a spiral." Either way, it's one of the most famous patterns in the world. So let's start with the basics. The Fibonacci sequence is simple. You begin with 0 and 1. Then you add the last two numbers to get the next one. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and so on. Keep adding forever, and you've got yourself the Fibonacci sequence. That's it. No magic, no alien intervention, just counting with addition. But here's where it gets interesting. If you take these numbers and use them to make rectangles, and then arrange those rectangles into a spiral, the shape looks familiar. It looks like seashells, like hurricanes, like galaxies, like a million things in nature. That's why people get so excited. This simple sequence seems to map onto the very structure of the world around us. Take a sunflower. If you look closely at its seeds, you'll see spirals radiating out from the center. Not one spiral, but two sets, curling in opposite directions. Count them, and you'll often find that the number of spirals in one direction and the number in the other direction are consecutive Fibonacci numbers. 34 spirals one way, 55 the other. That's not just coincidence, it's math at work. The spiral arrangement lets the sunflower pack seeds efficiently without leaving awkward gaps. Nature is stingy with space. Fibonacci happens to be the perfect packing strategy. Or look at a pine cone. Same story. The scales form spirals that match Fibonacci numbers. Pineapples too. Nature, it seems, is obsessed with Fibonacci spirals. And it makes sense. Spirals are efficient. They let plants maximize sunlight, seeds or leaves. If you're a plant competing for resources, Fibonacci is like nature's cheat sheet. But humans, of course, couldn't resist borrowing the pattern. Artists and architects have been playing with spirals for centuries. The Greeks built spiral designs into their columns. The Renaissance loved it. Even Salvador Dali, the master of surrealism, painted spirals straight out of Fibonacci's playbook. His painting The Sacrament of the Last Supper isn't just inside a golden rectangle. The composition also leans into Fibonacci proportions. Dali probably thought, why not? Let's throw in some sacred math while we're at it. And then there's nature's most famous spiral of all, the Nautilus shell. Perfect, elegant, endlessly curling. People love to point to it and say, behold, the golden ratio in action. Except here's the awkward truth. The Nautilus shell doesn't actually match the golden spiral perfectly. It's close but not exact. Same with a lot of those golden ratio in nature claims. Sometimes we see what we want to see. Our brains love patterns so much that we squint until the math fits. It's like seeing shapes in clouds. Is that really Fibonacci, or is it just kind of spirally? But whether or not nature is perfectly faithful to the sequence, the fascination is real. Fibonacci spirals feel satisfying to us. They're dynamic. They draw the eye inward and outward at the same time. They feel alive, and because they show up so often in plants, we probably evolved to find them pleasing. Our ancestors who noticed patterns in plants were more likely to survive because patterns often meant food. A spiral meant seeds, fruit, something edible. So maybe our love for Fibonacci is part math, part survival instinct. And then, of course, humans did what humans always do. We turned Fibonacci into a symbol. Books, websites, entire YouTube channels proclaim the Fibonacci sequence as proof of divine design. Some say it's evidence of God. Others say it's evidence of aliens. Personally, I think it's evidence that spirals are just really good at filling space. But hey, why not dream big? Still, even if we strip away the mysticism, Fibonacci is fun. It's the perfect example of how a simple rule can lead to complex beauty. Add two numbers together, over and over, and suddenly you've got patterns in sunflowers, galaxies, and modern art. That's the magic of math. Small rules, big consequences. Here's a little anecdote. Fibonacci himself, whose real name was Leonardo of Pisa, wasn't trying to find beauty. He was trying to solve a problem about rabbit reproduction. Seriously. His famous sequence started as an exercise in counting how many rabbits you'd get if they bred in a particular pattern. One pair in month 1, another pair in month 2, then all the pairs reproducing together. It was like a medieval math meme. Rabbits plus rabbits equals math. And from that silly puzzle came one of the most iconic patterns in history. So the next time you see a spiral, take a closer look. It might not be perfectly Fibonacci, but it's probably close. Your brain will whisper, that looks right. Your eyes will follow the curve, inward, outward, hypnotized. And even if it's not a divine code, it's still a reminder of how often math sneaks into beauty, even when we're not looking. In the next chapter, we'll explore another universal favorite, symmetry. Why do our brains love balance so much? Why do we find faces, buildings, and patterns more attractive when they're mirrored? And why sometimes breaking symmetry can be just as beautiful? Let's find out why our minds crave balance like a kid craves candy. If spirals hypnotize us, then symmetry soothes us. Few things are as instantly pleasing to the human brain as symmetry. A butterfly with perfectly mirrored wings, a cathedral facade where every column matches, a face that looks balanced on both sides. Our minds light up at symmetry, like cats seeing a laser pointer. But why? Why does symmetry feel beautiful? And why do we get so annoyed when things are just a little off? Let's start with the obvious. Symmetry is everywhere in nature. Flowers with petals evenly spaced. Snowflakes with six-fold symmetry, so perfect they make mathematicians tear up. Even our bodies are mostly symmetrical. 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes. The left and right sides of our face are close enough that we recognize each other instantly. If humans had evolved with one giant eye in the middle of the forehead and a second ear sticking out of the elbow, dating would have been way more complicated. Scientists think our love for symmetry might have survival roots. In the wild, symmetrical patterns often mean health. A flower with balanced petals is likely to be fertile. An animal with symmetrical features is probably strong and well developed. For early humans, noticing symmetry could have been a shortcut for recognizing what was safe, edible, or attractive. It's like a built-in mental filter. Symmetry equals good news. Psychologists have tested this. When people are shown two faces, one slightly more symmetrical than the other, most of us pick the symmetrical face as more attractive. Even babies, before they've learned what beauty is, stare longer at symmetrical faces. It's as if our brains have symmetry sensors hardwired in. But symmetry is not just about biology, it's about math. Symmetry means balance, reflection, repetition. If you can fold a shape in half and both sides match, that's mirror symmetry. If you rotate it and it still looks the same, that's rotational symmetry. Mathematicians love to categorize these things. Group theory, one of the great branches of modern math, is basically the science of symmetry. Crystals, molecules, even the laws of physics themselves are governed by symmetry. The universe is a symmetry junkie. Artists and architects figured this out long before mathematicians put it in textbooks. Islamic art, for example, is full of symmetry. Geometric mosaics, tessellations, patterns that repeat endlessly. These weren't just pretty designs. They symbolize the infinite, the divine order. When you look at a tiled wall in the Alhambra in Spain, it feels like staring into infinity. That's symmetry telling your brain, order, peace, balance. The Gothic cathedrals of Europe took symmetry to the skies. Look at Notre Dame in Paris. The twin towers mirror each other. The rose window is perfectly circular. The arches line up like marching soldiers. Walk inside, and the ceiling vaults branch out symmetrically like stone trees. The whole thing is designed to make you feel small in the face of divine perfection. And honestly, it works. Even atheists walk into those places and go, wow, that's symmetry flexing its muscles. But symmetry isn't just serious, it can also be playful. Think about kaleidoscopes. A simple tube of mirrors that turns random shapes into endless symmetric patterns. Children love them. Adults secretly love them too. The appeal is universal. You turn the tube, the colors shift, and your brain sighs with satisfaction. Balance restored. Of course, too much symmetry can get boring. If everything is perfectly mirrored, it starts to feel stiff, lifeless, even creepy. There's a reason perfectly mirrored faces in Photoshop often look unnatural. Real beauty usually has tiny imperfections. A little asymmetry makes things feel alive. It's the difference between a computer-generated face and a real human smile. Imperfect symmetry is perfect for us. Artists figured this out too. The Japanese concept of wabi-sabi celebrates asymmetry, imperfection, the beauty of things that are a little off. Think of a handmade ceramic bowl with one side slightly uneven. It feels warm, human, alive. Too much symmetry and it would just feel like a factory product. So beauty often lives in that tension. Symmetry to satisfy the brain, imperfection to charm the heart. There's also the fun side of symmetry breaking in science. Physicists discovered that at the tiniest scales, the universe doesn't always play fair. Some particles break symmetry in ways that are still mysterious. In fact, if the universe were perfectly symmetrical, you and I wouldn't even exist. Matter and antimatter would have annihilated each other completely after the Big Bang. Luckily, there was just a tiny asymmetry, a little imbalance that tipped the scales in favor of matter. In other words, imperfection is why we're here. So next time you worry about your face not being perfectly symmetrical, just remember, asymmetry created the universe. You're welcome. One of the most fascinating uses of symmetry in art is in mandalas. These circular designs found in Hindu and Buddhist traditions radiate symmetry outward like the spokes of a wheel. To meditate on a mandala is to meditate on balance, order, the universe itself. Psychologists like Carl Jung even used mandalas as a way to explore the human mind. Symmetry, it seems, isn't just eye candy. It can be a spiritual tool. And of course, mathematicians couldn't resist turning symmetry into full-blown art. Think of M.C. Escher, the Dutch artist who filled his drawings with impossible staircases and repeating tessellations of lizards and birds. His work is pure symmetry play, twisting the rules until your brain both delights and protests. Escher showed us that symmetry isn't static. It can move, shift, deceive. beauty with a sense of humour. So, why do our brains love symmetry? Because it makes the world feel understandable. When we see symmetry, we relax, we feel safe, we feel that the chaos of life has, at least for a moment, snapped into order. But we also love when symmetry is bent, when balance is almost perfect but not quite. That's where interest lives. That's where art thrives. In the next chapter, we'll look at what happens when artists throw symmetry out completely, when they rebel against math itself. Cubism, Dadaism, abstract art, the movements that broke the grid, smashed the mirrors, and still somehow created beauty. Because sometimes the best way to use math is to ignore it. So far, we've seen how math shaped art. Perspective gave us depth. Symmetry gave us balance. Spirals gave us motion. But what happens when artists get tired of grids, golden ratios, and vanishing points? What happens when they look at all this careful geometry and say, nope, let's smash it? That's when rebellion happens. And some of the greatest art of the modern age was born out of that rebellion. Let's rewind to the early 20th century. Europe had spent centuries worshipping perspective and proportion. Painters knew their vanishing points. Architects lined up their facades. Everything looked neat and rational, but the world itself wasn't so neat anymore. Cities were industrializing. Machines were everywhere. World wars loomed on the horizon. Life felt chaotic, and artists decided their art should feel chaotic too. Enter Cubism. Imagine you take a simple subject, like a bowl of fruit. In Renaissance style, you'd paint it in perspective, with light and shadow, so real you'd want to reach out and grab a grape. But the Cubists, led by Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, said, what if we show the fruit from all angles at once? The result looks like someone smashed the bowl and glued it back together at weird angles, flat planes, fractured geometry, multiple perspectives colliding on one canvas. It was like math gone rogue. Picasso once said, I paint forms as I think them, not as I see them. That was a direct rebellion against the rules of perspective. For centuries, geometry had been used to trick the eye into believing a painting was a window into the real world. The Cubists slammed the window shut. Their art wasn't about fooling the eye, it was about challenging the mind. And yet here's the twist. Cubism was still mathematical. It used geometry, but in a way that defied traditional rules. Triangles, rectangles, fragmented shapes. Instead of creating one clean perspective, it created many at once. The rebellion was not against math itself, but against the old way of using math. They broke the grid by making a new one. If Cubism was geometry in pieces, Dadaism was geometry thrown out the window completely. Dada was born during World War I, when artists looked at the insanity of the world and thought, if society is this irrational, why should art make sense? So they made nonsense. Marcel Duchamp took a urinal, put it in an art gallery, and called it Fountain. No perspective, no symmetry, no golden ratio, just pure chaos and provocation. The Dadaists were like pranksters. They didn't just rebel against math. They rebelled against the whole idea that art needed rules at all. Their message was clear. Beauty isn't order. Beauty can be absurd, messy, even ugly. Sometimes breaking every law is the only way to make a point. Then came abstract art. Wassily Kandinsky, Piet Mondrian, Jackson Pollock. These artists went beyond rebellion. They didn't even want to represent the real world anymore. No fruit bowls, no portraits, just shapes, colours and energy. Mondrian painted grids of black lines filled with red, blue and yellow squares. Simple, clean, no vanishing point. Pollock dripped paint onto a canvas in chaotic patterns that somehow still felt alive and rhythmic. Funny enough, mathematicians later looked at Pollock's paintings and found fractal patterns hidden inside. The splatters weren't random after all. They had statistical self-similarity, just like coastlines and clouds. So even when Pollock thought he was rebelling against structure, math snuck in anyway, like an uninvited guest at a party. Rebellion in art shows something important. Beauty isn't only about following rules. Sometimes beauty comes from breaking them. Too much symmetry feels stiff. Too much perspective feels predictable. By rejecting the old math, modern artists forced people to see differently. They showed that math and art aren't locked into one relationship. Sometimes they dance together, sometimes they fight, and sometimes the fight itself is beautiful. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. When abstract and cubist works first appeared, critics said they looked like a child's doodles. People stood in front of Picasso's fractured faces and muttered, "My kid could do that." Spoiler, your kid probably couldn't. These artists knew the rules very well. They studied perspective, symmetry, proportion. Then they chose to break them deliberately. That's what makes it powerful. You can't rebel against something you don't understand. Think of it like jazz, which we just talked about. Jazz musicians know the scales, the chords, the timing. That's why they can bend the rules so playfully. Modern artists did the same thing with geometry. They bent it, broke it, and built new languages of beauty. And the rebellion didn't stop in the early 20th century. Today, contemporary art continues to push against math. Digital artists distort symmetry with algorithms. Installations play with randomness and noise. Some pieces even invite viewers to destroy or rearrange them. The message is still alive. Math is powerful, but beauty isn't just numbers. Sometimes it's what happens when numbers fall apart. So next time you see a painting that looks chaotic or meaningless, take a second look. Maybe it's not rejecting beauty. Maybe it's expanding what beauty can mean. The absence of perspective can be a perspective. The lack of symmetry can be its own kind of symmetry. And sometimes the ugliest mess hides a mathematical surprise. In the next chapter, we'll zoom out from art and back into ideas. Philosophers have argued for centuries about whether beauty is objective, mathematical, or just a matter of taste. Is beauty really out there in numbers, or is it all in our heads? Plato, Kant, and some very modern scientists all have thoughts on the matter. Let's join the debate. We've wandered through temples, spirals, symmetries, and even rebellious artists throwing paint at the rules. But now we arrive at one of the oldest and trickiest questions humans have ever asked. What is beauty, really? Is beauty something out there in the world, an objective truth you can measure with numbers? Or is it just a feeling inside your head, subjective, personal, impossible to pin down? In other words, is beauty math, or is it just mood? The ancient philosophers had strong opinions. Plato, for example, believed beauty was objective. He thought everything in the physical world was just a shadow of some perfect eternal form. A beautiful circle drawn in sand was never truly perfect, but it pointed toward the perfect circle that existed in the realm of ideas. For Plato, beauty was tied to mathematical perfection. Straight lines, harmonious ratios, symmetry. These weren't just nice to look at. They were glimpses of truth itself. Plato would probably have had a golden ratio poster in his dorm room. Aristotle, Plato's student, was a little more grounded. He agreed that proportion and order were important, but he also thought beauty could come from function. A tool could be beautiful if it worked well. A horse could be beautiful if it ran with grace. To Aristotle, beauty wasn't only about geometry, it was also about purpose, which means, by his logic, even a well-designed can opener might count as beautiful. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and along comes Immanuel Kant. Kant was the ultimate overthinker. He argued that beauty isn't exactly objective, but it's not entirely subjective either. When we say something is beautiful, Kant said, we expect others to agree. If I say this painting is beautiful, I don't mean I personally like it. I mean any reasonable person should see it too. For Kant, beauty was about a kind of universal harmony between our senses and our reason, which, if you translate it, basically means beauty feels like math running smoothly in your brain. But not everyone bought this. Many modern thinkers argue beauty is entirely subjective. They say beauty is just cultural conditioning, personal preference, social fashion. In one era, plump bodies are beautiful. In another, thin bodies. In one culture, pale skin. In another, dark skin. Beauty standards shift like fashion trends. If beauty were pure math, wouldn't we all agree all the time? But we don't. One person sees a Pollock painting and calls it genius. Another sees the same splatters and says their toddler could do it. Beauty, in this view, is in the eye of the beholder. So who's right? Well, here's where modern science enters the chat. Cognitive psychologists and neuroscientists have been poking around in our brains to see how we respond to beauty. And guess what? Patterns emerge. Symmetry lights up reward centers. Certain ratios in music make our brains happy. Fractals in nature reduce stress when we look at them. There really are universal tendencies. Our brains are tuned to like certain mathematical structures. Even babies stare longer at symmetric shapes. So maybe Plato wasn't completely wrong after all. But here's the twist. Culture layers on top of those universal preferences. Yes, symmetry feels good, but whether you prefer Baroque palaces, minimalist Japanese gardens, or neon graffiti also depends on where and how you grew up. Beauty is like food. Humans everywhere crave sugar and fat, but the dishes we find delicious vary wildly by culture. Math sets the baseline, culture writes the menu. And sometimes, beauty is about context. Take a simple urinal in a bathroom. Not very beautiful. Put the same urinal in an art gallery with Marcel Duchamp's signature on it, and suddenly it's a masterpiece. Nothing about the geometry changed. What changed was the idea, which suggests beauty isn't only in the object, it's also in the meaning we attach to it. So maybe the real answer is that beauty is both objective and subjective. Math gives us the skeleton. Symmetry, proportion, harmony, culture and context put the flesh on that skeleton, and our personal experiences dress it up with style. That's why a sunflower, a Gothic cathedral, and a jazz solo can all feel beautiful, even though they're wildly different. They're all patterns, but they speak to us in different languages. Here's a little thought experiment. Imagine showing a perfectly drawn golden spiral to a medieval monk, a modern physicist, and a 5-year-old with a lollipop. The monk might see God's divine order. The physicist might see efficient packing of sunflower seeds. The 5-year-old might see nothing, because they're too busy eating the lollipop. Same spiral, different reactions. The math is there, but the beauty depends on the beholder. And this brings us to one of the most fun debates. Can beauty be measured? Some scientists have actually tried to design algorithms that score how attractive a face is based on symmetry and proportion. These apps will rate your selfie and tell you if you're a 6.8 or an 8.2, which, let's be honest, sounds like the worst possible party game. Not only are these ratings questionable, they also miss the point. A face isn't just ratios, it's expression, personality, presence. Beauty can't be reduced to decimals, even if math plays a role in why we find certain structures appealing. So where does this leave us? Beauty isn't pure math, but math is woven into beauty. It's not just taste, but taste matters. It's both universal and personal, eternal and fleeting, which, honestly, makes it more interesting. If beauty were just an equation, we'd get bored. If it were just chaos, we'd lose common ground. It's the dance between math and mind that keeps it alive. So next time you find yourself staring at something beautiful, a painting, a face, a flower, or even a perfectly arranged plate of sushi, remember that you're seeing more than just shapes. You're seeing math humming quietly in the background, filtered through culture, wrapped in personal meaning. Beauty is math in disguise, but also much more. In the next chapter, we'll move from philosophy back to anatomy. We'll look at the proportions of the human body, the Vitruvian man, the golden ratio's obsession with faces, and why Instagram filters are basically modern-day geometry experiments. Spoiler, Da Vinci didn't invent the duck face, but he definitely would have analysed it. If there's one thing humans have always been obsessed with, it's ourselves. We love looking at our own faces, our own bodies, and asking, am I beautiful? Sometimes we ask mirrors, sometimes we ask Instagram filters, sometimes historically we asked mathematicians, because for centuries people believed the secret to human beauty was hidden in proportion, that the body could be measured, mapped and understood like architecture. The most famous example is Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. You've seen the drawing, the naked guy standing in both a circle and a square, arms and legs spread like he's trying to show off at a yoga class. Leonardo didn't invent the idea. He was inspired by Vitruvius, a Roman architect from 2,000 years earlier, who wrote that the human body was the model of perfect proportion. A temple should reflect the proportions of a person, because if the human form is divine, then buildings should echo it. Leonardo, being Leonardo, took it further. He measured bodies obsessively. According to him, a person's arm span should equal their height. The distance from hairline to chin should be 1/10 of the body. The head should fit into the body 8 times. He wasn't just doodling a naked man for fun. He was trying to prove that the human form itself was geometry, that we are walking math problems. And of course, the golden ratio made its way into this obsession. Renaissance scholars argued that the distance from your head to your navel compared to your total height should equal phi, about 1.618. The length of your face to its width should equal phi. Even your teeth supposedly follow phi. The idea was that the most beautiful humans are golden ratio humans. that if you measured enough you could find the code of attractiveness. Fast forward to today, and the obsession hasn't gone away. Cosmetic surgeons sometimes use golden ratio templates to suggest the ideal nose, lips, or jawline. There are even smartphone apps that let you upload a selfie and get a golden ratio beauty score, which, let's be honest, is a terrible idea. Imagine downloading an app that tells you your face is a mathematical 4 out of 10. That's not enlightenment, that's just digital bullying. The truth is, while some ratios do pop up in faces and bodies, they're not the whole story. Human beauty is far more complicated. Symmetry plays a role, yes. Proportion matters, sure. But personality, expression, culture, and individual taste matter just as much. Cleopatra was considered the most beautiful woman of her time, but if you look at coins stamped with her profile, her features don't exactly scream golden ratio supermodel. Beauty is context as much as math. And besides, if we were all perfectly proportional, life would get boring fast. Those tiny quirks and asymmetries, the crooked smile, the uneven dimple, the slightly larger left eye, are what make faces interesting. Perfection might be mathematically elegant, but imperfection is charming. If everyone looked like the Vitruvian Man, dating apps would be very confusing. That said, the link between math and anatomy isn't all about beauty. Proportion also matters for biomechanics. Your height to leg length ratio affects how fast you can run. Arm span to body weight ratios matter in sports. Gymnasts, basketball players, swimmers all have body proportions that suit their skills. In that sense, geometry shapes not just how we look, but how we move. Here's a fun example. The average person's arm span is about equal to their height, but Michael Phelps, the Olympic swimmer, has an arm span several inches longer than his height. Combine that with short legs and giant feet, and you get a body built like a human dolphin. His proportions are basically a cheat code for swimming. Beauty aside, that's math giving someone Olympic gold. Even evolution has played with proportions. Babies, for example, have big heads compared to their bodies. That's part of why we find them cute. Their giant eyes and round faces trigger a protective instinct in adults. As we grow, proportions change. Heads become smaller relative to the body, legs longer. Fashion trends sometimes exaggerate these shifts. Think of the super long legs in fashion illustrations. Exaggerated proportions tell our brains, elegant, striking, powerful. So, is there really a mathematical formula for beauty? Kind of, but not exactly. Yes, certain ratios tend to be more pleasing to us. Yes, symmetry and proportion play a role, but beauty is too slippery to be reduced to decimals. What counts as beautiful changes across cultures and time periods. In the Renaissance, plumpness was a sign of wealth and beauty. In other times, thinness was prized. In some cultures, long necks are beautiful. In others, tiny feet. Math may whisper in the background, but culture sings the loudest. And yet, there's something comforting in the idea that we carry geometry within us, that our arms, legs, and faces are echoes of deeper patterns, that somewhere inside our awkward selfies and duck face filters, math is quietly holding things together. Speaking of filters, social media has turned proportion into a new kind of obsession. Apps stretch cheekbones, slim noses, and enlarge eyes, all in search of some digital ideal. These filters aren't random. They're coded with ratios, symmetry, and geometric rules. In a weird way, Instagram is just Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man with neon lights and hashtags, which is both hilarious and terrifying. So the next time you look in the mirror and wonder if your proportions are perfect, remember two things. First, no one is perfectly proportional. Not even Leonardo's famous sketch. Second, imperfection is interesting. Your quirks are what make you stand out. Math might admire symmetry, but people fall in love with asymmetry. In the next chapter, we'll leave the human body behind and step into the wilderness. We'll look at chaos and fractals, patterns in trees, clouds, coastlines, and why nature's messiest designs still turn out to be mathematical. Get ready to see how beauty hides in the wild. Unpredictable shapes of the world. So far, we've talked about neat proportions, golden ratios, symmetry, and carefully drawn Vitruvian men. But step outside into nature, and things don't always look so tidy. Coastlines twist and turn unpredictably. Clouds puff into shapes that refuse to fit any simple geometry. Trees branch in wild, irregular ways. At first glance, it looks like chaos. But here's the catch. Hidden inside that chaos is math. Messy math, yes, but math nonetheless. And that math often comes in the form of fractals. A fractal is a pattern that repeats at different scales. Zoom in and you see the same structure as when you zoom out. It's self-similarity, like Russian dolls, but instead of wooden figurines, its shapes repeating forever. One of the simplest examples is a tree. The trunk splits into branches, the branches split into smaller branches, and those into twigs. No two branches are exactly alike, but the pattern is the same at every scale. That's a fractal. Clouds are fractals too. Look at a fluffy cumulus from far away, lumpy, uneven, irregular. Now zoom in on a small puff of it. Same lumpiness, same irregularity. Zoom again and again, and the pattern never really smooths out. Coastlines are another classic example. From an airplane, Britain looks jagged. From a satellite, still jagged. From standing on the shore with wet socks, jagged again. No matter how close you get, the roughness remains. That roughness is fractal. In the 1970s, mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot gave fractals their name and showed how widespread they are. He famously asked, "How long is the coast of Britain?" At first you think, easy, we'll just measure it. But the more closely you measure, the longer it gets. Use a ruler 100 miles long, and you get one number. Use a ruler 10 miles long, and you capture more detail, so the coastline lengthens. Use a ruler 1 meter long, and it's even longer. Because the jaggedness never ends, that's fractal geometry. Infinite complexity in finite space. Nature loves fractals because they're efficient. Trees branch to catch maximum sunlight. Lungs branch to maximize surface area for breathing. Blood vessels spread fractal to reach every cell. Lightning forks fractal to find the quickest path through air. Even broccoli, especially Romanesco broccoli with its hypnotic spirals, is basically math you can steam and eat. And here's the beautiful thing. Fractals look good to us. Psychologists have found that people relax when they look at fractal patterns. Heart rates slow down, stress levels drop. Some studies even show hospital patients recover faster when their rooms have windows facing fractal-rich scenery, like trees and hills, rather than plain walls. It's as if our brains are tuned to find comfort in this messy order. Too simple, like a blank wall, and our minds get bored. Too chaotic, like static noise, and our minds get anxious. But fractals hit the sweet spot. Structured chaos, beauty in the balance. Of course, mathematicians being mathematicians, they didn't stop at noticing fractals in nature. They invented their own. The most famous is the Mandelbrot set. It looks like a black blob with little circles stuck to it, surrounded by endless psychedelic spirals when you zoom in, zoom forever, and new patterns keep appearing, endlessly complex, endlessly self-similar. It's like a kaleidoscope that never repeats. People have called it the most beautiful image in mathematics, which is saying something, because usually mathematicians get excited about things that look like squiggly graphs. The Mandelbrot set isn't just pretty, it's a window into chaos theory. Tiny changes in equations can lead to wildly different outcomes. That's why weather is so hard to predict. Clouds, storms, turbulence, all are fractal phenomena. Sensitive dependence on initial conditions. The butterfly effect. A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, and weeks later you get rain in London. Chaos may look random, but it has structure. Fractals also sneak into art. Some African textiles, Celtic knots, and Hindu temple carvings use repeating, self-similar designs. And then there's Jackson Pollock, the famous drip painter. For decades, critics argued whether his splatters were genius or just mess. But in the 1990s, scientists analysed his paintings and discovered fractal patterns. The drips weren't random at all. They had statistical self-similarity like coastlines and clouds. Pollock, maybe without even realising it, was painting fractals. His chaos was math in disguise. There's also digital art. Computer-generated fractals became a whole movement in the 1980s and 90s. Posters of neon Mandelbrot zooms decorated dorm rooms everywhere. Even today, fractals inspire visualizations, animations, and algorithmic designs. They're hypnotic because they trigger the same satisfaction as nature's fractals. They look like infinity caught in a loop. So, is this beauty objective? Do fractals prove Plato was right that math is the essence of beauty? Maybe. Or maybe it's just evolution. Our brains evolved in forests, mountains, rivers, and clouds, all fractal landscapes. We survived by recognizing and navigating those patterns, so our brains learned to love them. Beauty. In this case, maybe survival, wearing a fancy hat. Either way, fractals remind us that beauty isn't always neat. Sometimes it's messy, irregular, endlessly complicated. And yet, even in the chaos, math is humming softly. Self-similarity, scaling, infinite detail. The universe doesn't need a golden rectangle to impress us. It just needs a coastline. So next time you stare at clouds drifting overhead or waves crashing against rocks, or even the spirals of a humble broccoli, take a second to smile. You're looking at math pretending to be wild, chaos dressed up as beauty. A reminder that order and disorder aren't opposites, they're partners dancing together. Up to now, we've looked at beauty in space, in shapes, spirals, proportions, and fractals. But beauty isn't only something you see, it's also something you feel in time. Poetry, dance, music, all of them are built on patterns that unfold moment by moment. And of course, those patterns turn out to be mathematical, because apparently math can't resist crashing every party. Let's start with poetry. The oldest poems in human history weren't written to be read silently. They were spoken, sung, chanted, and what held them together wasn't just words, but rhythm, meter. Take the ancient Greek epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They were composed in dactylic hexameter, which sounds complicated but really just means lines with a pattern of long and short syllables, repeated 6 times. It was basically math for the ears. Without that rhythm, the poems would have been impossible to memorize. With it, singers could recite thousands of lines by heart. Rhythm turned words into structure. The same goes for Shakespeare. His plays are written mostly in iambic pentameter, dudum, 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 5 pairs of syllables, unstressed, then stressed. If you've ever read it out loud, you can feel the beat under the language. That heartbeat is math. Count the syllables, place the accents, repeat. Shakespeare was basically writing music with words, and the regularity of it makes the poetry feel natural and satisfying, even centuries later. Now switch from words to movement. Dance is math in motion. Every step, every spin, every clap is placed in time. Folk dances often repeat patterns in cycles, steps forward, steps back, repeat. Ballets count beats to guide leaps and turns. Hip-hop choreography layers rhythms on rhythms. Even if you're just dancing in a club, your body is unconsciously syncing with the beat, dividing time into regular units. You've turned into a walking, grooving metronome. Some dances are astonishingly mathematical. Take Bharatanatyam, a classical Indian dance. The footwork follows rhythmic cycles called talars, some of them incredibly complex. A dancer might tap out a 35-beat cycle while moving in perfect coordination with music and hand gestures. It's like doing long division with your feet. Audiences may not consciously count the beats, but they feel the structure, the order beneath the motion. That's math creating beauty in time. And then, of course, there's rhythm in music. We already talked about harmony, the math of ratios, but rhythm is just as mathematical. Beats divided into halves, quarters, eighths. Syncopation playing tricks on your expectations. Polyrhythms layering 2 or more time patterns on top of each other. African drumming traditions, for example, often use 3 against 2 rhythms, while one part of the drum circle plays in 3 beats, another plays in 2. The result is complex, vibrant, impossible to sit still to. Even our own bodies run on rhythm. Heartbeats, breathing, walking. All of them follow regular cycles. Maybe that's why rhythm feels so natural. We're literally wired for it. Babies bounce to music before they can walk. Soldiers march in time to feel unity. Religious rituals use rhythm to create transcendence, from Gregorian chants to Sufi whirling. Rhythm connects us not just to math, but to each other. Of course, sometimes rhythm gets wild. Jazz drummers play with polyrhythms so tricky that listeners get lost in the maze. Modern poets break free of meter to write free verse. Dancers improvise off the beat. But even rebellion depends on the structure it breaks. A jazz solo feels chaotic only because your brain is still listening for the hidden pulse underneath. Free verse still carries echoes of rhythm, like ghosts of the old rules. Even chaos has math hiding inside. Here's a fun example. The mathematician Laszlo Torth once analysed Hungarian folk songs and discovered that their rhythms matched Fibonacci sequences. The number of beats in verses often lined up with Fibonacci numbers, 5, 8, 13. Was this deliberate? Maybe not, but it shows how human creativity gravitates towards certain patterns, even unconsciously. Math sneaks into our art like a polite but persistent guest who refuses to leave. There's also rhyming schemes in poetry. ABAB, ABB, sonnets, limericks are just patterns, combinatorics with words. A limerick, for example, always follows the same structure, 5 lines, with a specific meter and rhyme scheme. That predictability is what makes it satisfying, and also what makes it funny. The setup primes your brain for the punchline. Poetry is a math problem wearing a fancy hat. And think about rap music. Rap is poetry supercharged with rhythm. Flow is about aligning syllables with beats, bending language to fit mathematical timing. Rappers often play with syncopation, unexpected pauses, rapid-fire syllable counts. Eminem, for instance, is famous for cramming ridiculous numbers of syllables into single bars, like a mathematician speedrunning equations. It's language as math, but performed with swagger. Why does all this matter? Because patterns in time are the heartbeat of culture. They shape how we remember, how we move, how we feel. A catchy song gets stuck in your head because its rhythm hits the brain's pattern recognition system just right. A poem resonates because its meter feels like a heartbeat. A dance feels powerful because it syncs your body to a mathematical cycle. But just like with symmetry and art, perfection isn't always the goal. Too rigid a rhythm gets boring. Too messy a rhythm gets overwhelming. Beauty often lives in the space between order and surprise. A steady beat with just enough syncopation to keep you awake. A rhyme scheme with one clever twist. A dance that flows smoothly but throws in an unexpected spin. That's where math and creativity meet. So next time you tap your foot to a song, or recite a line of poetry, or clap along to a dance, remember you're participating in math in motion, time divided, shaped and made beautiful. So far we've seen math sneaking into temples, spirals, symphonies and even Pollock splatters. But now we live in a new era. Computers, algorithms, artificial intelligence. Machines that don't just calculate, but also create. And naturally people are asking, can algorithms make art? Can a computer paint a masterpiece, compose a symphony, or write a poem that actually moves us? Or are we just getting fancy math homework disguised as creativity? Let's start with music. Believe it or not, algorithms have been writing music for decades. Back in the 1950s, before computers could even play Pong, programmers were feeding rules into machines to generate melodies. These early attempts weren't exactly chart toppers, but they proved a point. Music follows patterns, and patterns can be coded. Today, AI systems can compose full symphonies, jazz improvisations, or background tracks for YouTube videos. Some sound eerily like Mozart, others sound like a robot having a nervous breakdown. The logic is the same as what Bach did in his fugues. Take a theme, apply rules, vary it, repeat. An algorithm doesn't get tired, doesn't get distracted, and definitely doesn't get stage fright. It just cranks out variations endlessly. Want 1,000 versions of a lullaby? The algorithm's got you. Want a soundtrack that adapts to your mood? Spotify is already halfway there. Your playlist is basically math gossiping about your taste. Visual art is no different. Algorithms can now generate paintings, drawings, even photorealistic portraits. Some of these images are so convincing they've been mistaken for real photos. Others look like dreams after too much pizza. Neural networks trained on millions of artworks learn to mimic styles. Want a portrait in the style of Van Gogh? No problem. Want a cityscape that looks like Escher took a vacation to Tokyo? Done. In 2018, a portrait created by an algorithm called Edmond de Bellamy was sold at Christie's auction for over $400,000. It looked like a hazy, slightly blurry aristocrat. Not quite Rembrandt, but definitely something. The art world was stunned. Was this creativity? Or was it just a clever trick? Was the real artist the algorithm, the programmers who built it, or the art collectors who hyped it up? Poetry has entered the game too. Algorithms can generate haikus, sonnets, or free verse. Sometimes the results are surprisingly beautiful. Other times they sound like your phone's autocorrect had an existential crisis. One AI-generated poem famously included the line, "The sun is a lonely hunter of socks," which is nonsense, but honestly, I've read worse at open mic nights. So, can algorithms really create beauty? Here's where things get tricky. On the one hand, yes, the outputs can be beautiful, moving, even original in some sense. On the other hand, algorithms don't feel anything. They don't know what beauty is. They're just crunching probabilities, remixing patterns from data. If beauty is math in disguise, then machines can absolutely do it. But if beauty is emotion, soul, meaning, well, that's harder to automate. This isn't entirely new, by the way. Human artists have always used systems, formulas, and algorithms. Bach followed strict rules. Islamic tile artists used repeating tessellations. Poets counted syllables. The difference now is that the rules are executed by machines, at massive speed and scale. A human writes a sonnet in an afternoon. A computer can write 10,000 in a minute. Quantity isn't the problem. Meaning is. And yet, here's the paradox. When humans see something created by an algorithm, we often supply the meaning ourselves. We project emotion onto it. A computer generates a moody painting and we say, it speaks to my loneliness. The computer doesn't know loneliness, but we do. And beauty, as we've seen, lives partly in the beholder. Maybe the machine doesn't need to feel. Maybe it just needs to trigger feelings in us. Of course, some people find this idea terrifying. If algorithms can make art, what happens to human artists? Do painters, musicians, poets become obsolete? I don't think so, because art has never just been about the final product. It's about the story, the struggle, the context. When Van Gogh painted Starry Night, the swirls weren't just swirls. They were swirls painted by a man wrestling with his mind, his life, his vision of the world. The computer could imitate the swirls, but not the story. In fact, I'd argue that algorithmic art makes human art even more valuable. If a computer can churn out infinite pretty pictures, then what stands out are the works made by real people, with real mess, real imperfections, real fingerprints. Just like perfect symmetry can feel cold, algorithmic perfection can feel hollow. Humanity, with all its quirks and flaws, might be the secret ingredient that machines can't fake. Still, it's fascinating to watch algorithms push the boundaries. Some artists now collaborate with AI, treating it like a partner. They feed it ideas, then respond to what it generates, creating a back-and-forth process. It's like jazz improvisation, but one of the musicians is a laptop. Others deliberately use AI to produce ugly or uncanny works, exploring what happens when beauty glitches. So maybe the real future isn't humans versus machines, but humans and machines together, expanding what beauty can mean. Algorithms give us new tools, new perspectives, new surprises. They don't replace creativity, they multiply it. And honestly, whether you love or hate algorithmic art, there's one thing you can't deny. It proves once again that beauty and math are inseparable. An algorithm is nothing but math. Equations, probabilities, data. And yet, out of that cold machinery comes warmth, colour, music, poetry, numbers dressed up as art. Math in disguise, all over again. So far, we've seen math in temples, paintings, spirals, and even algorithms pretending to be Picasso. But what about the world we live in right now? The skyscrapers, the bridges, the airports, the concert halls. Modern architecture may look sleek, futuristic, or sometimes just plain weird, but underneath the glass and steel, it's still geometry doing the heavy lifting. Without math, half our buildings would collapse, and the other half would look like IKEA furniture assembled by a sleep-deprived student. Let's start with skyscrapers. These giants of glass and steel are basically math problems stacked vertically. Gravity, wind, earthquakes, all trying their best to knock the thing over. Engineers fight back with geometry, triangles for stability, parabolas for strength, ratios to distribute weight. That sleek tower in Dubai, the Burj Khalifa, over 800 meters tall, its design was inspired by a desert flower, but also carefully calculated so wind would swirl around it instead of ripping it apart. Beauty meets function, both dressed in math. Bridges are another great example. From the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco to the Millau Viaduct in France, they're both art and equation. Suspension bridges use elegant curves called catenaries, which happen to be the natural shape a hanging chain makes. That curve isn't just pretty, it's the most efficient way to handle tension. Nature discovered it first, then architects borrowed it. Every time you drive across a bridge and don't plummet into the water, you can thank geometry. And then there are concert halls. Designing a space for sound is trickier than it looks. You want every note of the violin to reach the audience without echoes turning Beethoven into a muddled mess. That means calculating the angles of walls, the curves of ceilings, even the texture of materials. The The Sydney Opera House with its famous shell-like sails isn't just a pretty icon for postcards. Those curves scatter sound in specific ways, balancing clarity and resonance. Math is hidden in every echo. But modern architecture isn't just about stability and acoustics. It's also about pushing the boundaries of beauty. Enter parametric design. This is when architects use algorithms to generate forms that look like they belong in a sci-fi movie. Curved facades that ripple like fabric, roofs that twist like seashells, entire buildings that look more alive than artificial. Computers crunch the equations, and suddenly the architect is less of a drafter and more of a conductor, guiding numbers into shapes. One famous example is the Beijing National Stadium, also known as the Bird's Nest. Its tangled web of steel beams looks random, but it's precisely calculated. Each beam supports the others, distributing weight like a giant puzzle. Another is Zaha Hadid's architecture. Her buildings look like they were poured, not built. Flowing curves, organic shapes, impossible angles. Behind the futuristic style is pure math. Algorithms, geometry, parametric equations. The math doesn't show, but it holds everything together. Even mundane buildings hide math. Office towers use fractal-like floor plans to maximize natural light. Airports use symmetry and proportion to guide passenger flow. Shopping malls sometimes use Fibonacci spirals in their layouts, tricking you into walking past more stores than you planned. Yes, even consumerism has math in disguise. And let's not forget sustainability. Modern architects use math to calculate airflow, sunlight angles, and energy efficiency. Solar panels need optimal tilt. Windows need to minimize heat in summer and maximize it in winter. A building that breathes efficiently is essentially solving equations for survival. It's eco-math, disguised as sleek design. Of course, not all math in architecture is serious. Sometimes architects just show off. The Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, designed by Frank Gehry, looks like a spaceship crash landed on the riverbank. The math involved in curving those sheets of titanium is staggering. Gehry once admitted he doesn't always know what the building will look like until the computer spits it out. That's math improvisation, architectural jazz. And sometimes math-inspired buildings even become memes. Take the Gherkin in London. An office tower shaped like, well, a giant pickle. Its curved design is mathematically brilliant for wind resistance and energy use. But to Londoners, it's just the Gherkin. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and sometimes the beholder is hungry. So what does all this tell us? That modern architecture is the perfect marriage of math and beauty. Engineers use numbers to make sure buildings stand up. Architects use numbers to make sure buildings stand out. The result is a world where we live inside geometry every day, whether we notice it or not. And maybe that's the quiet magic. You don't walk into a train station thinking, "Ah yes, the quadratic equations here are delightful," but your brain feels the order, the proportion, the balance. The math works invisibly, shaping your experience without you needing to solve anything. So next time you stand under a bridge, gaze up at a skyscraper, or walk through a museum that makes you gasp, take a moment to appreciate the hidden math. It's there in the curves, the angles, the symmetry. It's what keeps the walls from falling, the sound from echoing, the beauty from collapsing into chaos. We've talked about beauty in temples, paintings, music, and skyscrapers, but let's be honest, humans didn't invent beauty, we just noticed it. Long before architects calculated curves or artists painted golden rectangles, nature was already busy showing off. Flowers, shells, feathers, galaxies, all of them shaped by forces that look suspiciously mathematical. Evolution, it turns out, has been designing beauty for millions of years. Take the peacock's tail, a giant fan of shimmering blue and green feathers, each one covered in eye-like patterns. From a survival standpoint, it's ridiculous. The tail makes the bird heavy, awkward, and easy to spot by predators. But from a beauty standpoint, it's genius. Peons look at that massive fan and think, now there's a healthy mate. The symmetry, the patterns, the sheer excess, all of it signals strong genes. It's math as a pickup line. And it's not just peacocks, butterflies, beetles, tropical fish. Evolution has filled the world with colour and symmetry. Biologists call it sexual selection. Traits that are mathematically impressive, even if impractical, get passed on because they attract mates. Think of it as natural Tinder, where symmetry and ratios are the swipe right criteria. Flowers use similar tricks. A daisy has petals arranged in radial symmetry. A sunflower packs its seeds in Fibonacci spirals. Orchids grow in shapes that mirror insects, luring them in for pollination. Nature doesn't care if humans think it's pretty. It just cares if the math works. But our brains evolved in the same environment, so we find the results beautiful too. When you hand someone a bouquet of roses, you're basically saying, "Here, enjoy this package of optimized reproductive geometry." And then there's camouflage. Not every animal wants to stand out. Some want to disappear. But even camouflage is mathematical. Tigers have stripes that break up their outline in the forest. Zebras use dazzle patterns, stripes that confuse predators about which way the herd is moving. Fish shimmer with colors that blend perfectly into the ocean. The beauty of camouflage is subtle, but it's still geometry in action. Patterns interacting with light, space, and perception. Nature also plays with fractals. Ferns, trees, rivers, lightning, all branch in self-similar ways. These fractal patterns aren't just pretty, they're efficient. Branching maximizes surface area for catching sunlight, spreading blood, or channeling water. When we look at a tree silhouetted against the sky and think, wow, that's beautiful, part of what we're admiring is its fractal efficiency. Our brains like it because it feels right. Order inside apparent chaos. And let's not forget spiral galaxies. Billions of stars swirling in Fibonacci-like arms. The Milky Way itself is one giant cosmic spiral. We're literally living inside a math problem, orbiting through a structure that mirrors seashells and hurricanes. The universe doesn't have to be beautiful, it just is, which is maybe the most humbling thought of all. Scientists have actually studied why humans find these natural patterns beautiful. One theory is called processing fluency. The idea is simple. Our brains find it easier to process symmetrical, proportional, or fractal patterns. When something is easy to understand visually, we experience that ease as pleasure. Beauty is, in this sense, the brain's way of saying thanks for the simple math problem. That's why sunsets, snowflakes, and starry skies feel good. They're math our neurons enjoy solving. But here's where it gets funny. Evolution doesn't design beauty for us. Flowers don't bloom to make us happy. Peacocks don't strut for Instagram. These patterns evolved for survival and reproduction. We just happen to piggyback on them, finding beauty in things that weren't designed for us at all. It's like nature threw a party for itself, and we showed up uninvited and said, wow, nice decorations. And yet beauty in nature also inspires us. Artists copy it, architects mimic it, engineers design planes like birds and solar panels like leaves. There's even a field called biomimicry, where scientists study natural designs to solve human problems. The sticky feet of geckos inspired new adhesives. The beak of a kingfisher inspired a faster, quieter train. Beauty, in this case, isn't just pleasing, it's practical. Math hidden in feathers and flowers ends up reshaping technology. Of course, not all of nature's math looks beautiful to us. Some patterns are creepy. The precise symmetry of a spider's web, for example, is stunning. Unless you hate spiders, then it's nightmare fuel. The same goes for snake scales or the compound eyes of insects. Evolution doesn't care if we find it pretty. The math works for survival, and that's enough. Beauty, in our sense, is just a side effect. Still, there's something profound in realizing how much math lies underneath it all. Symmetry signals health. Spirals signal efficiency. Fractals signal scale. Camouflage signals survival. We might argue endlessly about what counts as beauty in art, but when it comes to nature, the math is written into the DNA. Life is geometry and motion. So next time you're outside, look closely. A leaf, a seashell, a bird's feather, all are carrying millions of years of mathematical refinement. You don't need a golden ratio ruler to appreciate it. Just knowing that beauty isn't random, that it's shaped by math and evolution, makes it even more incredible. All along this journey, we've seen math sneaking into beauty like an uninvited but very clever guest. Symmetry, spirals, ratios, fractals, order everywhere. But here's the twist. Some of the most powerful beauty we experience comes not from following the rules, but from breaking them. From surprise, disruption, even deliberate imperfection. Because if everything were predictable math, life would be neat but boring. Beauty sometimes needs a little chaos to keep it interesting. Think about music. Harmony built on ratios feels good. Yes, but too much harmony can sound bland, like eating plain rice forever. Dissonance. Notes that clash add spice. Jazz musicians know this well. They bend notes, play against the beat, throw in strange chords that shouldn't work but somehow do. The thrill of jazz comes from the balance between structure and rebellion. The beat is there, but the drummer nudges it sideways. The chord progression is familiar, but the soloist leaps out of bounds. The math is broken, but beautifully broken. Art works the same way. After centuries of symmetry and perspective, modern artists decided to smash the rules. Cubism fractured geometry, abstract art tossed representation out the window. Jackson Pollock dripped paint like a toddler with too much sugar and somehow created canvases that draw millions of viewers. Why? Because the break from order feels alive. Our brains crave patterns, yes, but we also crave novelty. Predictability soothes us, but surprise excites us. Even in nature, beauty sometimes comes from rule breaking. Consider a tree growing out of the side of a cliff at a bizarre angle. It's not symmetrical, it's not proportional, but it's striking. Or think of a jagged mountain peak. Technically messy, but breathtaking. Perfection pleases us. Imperfection moves us. Philosophers have noticed this too. The Japanese concept of wabi-sabi celebrates imperfection, asymmetry, and impermanence. A cracked bowl repaired with gold is considered more beautiful than one that never broke. The flaw tells a story. The break from symmetry makes it human. Beauty here is not math in disguise, it's humanity showing through the cracks. And then there's humour. Comedy often works by breaking patterns. A joke sets up an expectation, then flips it. The punchline is funny precisely because it breaks the rhythm your brain predicted. Even laughter, in its way, is beauty born from disruption. Science has its own examples. In physics, symmetry is elegant, but the universe we live in only exists because of symmetry breaking. At the beginning of time, matter and antimatter should have cancelled each other out perfectly, but a tiny imbalance, a small broken symmetry, left just enough matter behind to build stars, planets, and you sitting here listening to me ramble about it. Perfection would have left nothing. Imperfection made everything. Our own bodies carry the same truth. No one's face is perfectly symmetrical. If it were, it might look eerie, artificial. What makes a face charming are the tiny quirks, a lopsided smile, a dimple only on one cheek, one eyebrow slightly higher than the other. Instagram filters may chase golden ratios, but real attraction often sparks from the asymmetries. Perfect math makes mannequins. Imperfect math makes people. This love of rule breaking shows up in storytelling too. Most stories follow patterns, beginning, middle, end, conflict, climax, resolution. But the stories we remember most are often the ones that twist the formula. A surprise ending. A character who defies expectations. Narrative math broken in just the right way. That's why spoilers hurt so much. They rob us of the pleasure of being surprised. Even design and fashion thrive on this tension. Think of a room that's perfectly balanced. Every piece of furniture lined up just right. It feels sterile. Now add one quirky lamp at an odd angle, or one splash of unexpected colour. Suddenly the room feels alive. Fashion does the same. A ripped pair of jeans, an asymmetrical dress, shoes that don't quite match. Perfection is a bit boring. Imperfection catches the eye. So why does beauty sometimes come from breaking rules? Because our brains love contrast. We need order to feel safe, but we need surprise to feel awake. Predictability tells us the world makes sense. Surprise tells us the world is alive. Put the two together, and you get beauty that moves us. Mathematically, you could even say beauty lives in the sweet spot between order and chaos. Too much order and you get monotony. Too much chaos and you get noise. But balanced just right, you get jazz, Pollock, wabi-sabi pottery, mountain peaks, and the crooked smile that makes your heart skip. So maybe beauty isn't just math in disguise. Maybe beauty is what happens when math flirts with breaking its own rules. When symmetry cracks, when ratios stretch, when spirals wobble. The rules give structure, the rebellion gives soul. Together they give us wonder. We've wandered a long road together. From Pythagoras plucking strings in ancient Greece, to sunflowers twisting into spirals, to Bach coding music centuries before computers, to Picasso smashing perspective, to AI spitting out moody portraits that look like aristocrats who've seen a ghost. And now, as we reach the end, one truth keeps echoing. Math and beauty have been dancing together forever, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in rebellion, always in step. Think about it. The universe didn't have to be beautiful. Equations could have churned out a bland grey soup of particles. No spirals, no colours, no music. Instead, we got galaxies curling into Fibonacci arms. We got snowflakes with hexagonal perfection. We got trees fractaling toward the sky and seashells spiralling in golden curves. Beauty isn't an accident. It's geometry, physics, probability, the hidden math of nature, unfolding without effort. And we, strange little humans, noticed. We saw patterns in the stars and called them constellations. We heard ratios in music and called them harmonies. We built temples with sacred geometry, painted with perspective, carved symmetry into cathedrals. We didn't invent beauty, we tuned into it. Math was already there, humming quietly, waiting for someone to listen. But here's the twist. Beauty isn't just math. It's also the breaking of math. Jazz lives in syncopation. Wabi-sabi lives in cracks and imperfections. Stories live in plot twists. Love lives in quirks. Perfect symmetry feels sterile. A crooked smile feels alive. Beauty isn't found in rules alone, but in the play between rules and rebellion. Math sets the rhythm. Life improvises the melody. What's most fascinating is how universal this is. Across cultures, across time, people have found beauty in math's language. The Greeks sought the golden ratio. Islamic artists built infinite tessellations. Indian dancers tapped out complex taals. African drummers layered polyrhythms. Japanese philosophers celebrated asymmetry. Even when cultures disagreed on what was beautiful, they all spoke with math in one way or another. Beauty has infinite dialects, but numbers run through all of them. And today, in the digital age, the dance continues. Algorithms paint, compose, and design. Architects twist steel into seashell curves. Scientists find fractals in coastlines and galaxies. Your Spotify playlist is shaped by probabilities. Your Instagram filter is coded with ratios. Whether we like it or not, math is still choreographing beauty, even when it hides behind screens. But maybe the real magic is this. Beauty is never only in the numbers, it's in us. Math gives the structure, but our hearts give the meaning. A peacock's tail is just geometry until a peahen finds it irresistible. A Bach fugue is just ratios until it makes someone cry in a cathedral. A Pollock drip is just statistics until a viewer feels chaos and order colliding on canvas. Beauty is math translated into emotion, and emotion translated back into math. So, is beauty objective? Is it subjective? The truth is, it's both. It's spirals and symmetry written into the world, and it's the stories, cultures, and quirks we bring to them. Beauty is a bridge between numbers and feelings, between equations and goosebumps, between math and meaning. Maybe that's why so many thinkers, from Plato to Kant to modern neuroscientists, keep circling back to the same idea. Beauty is the place where reason and wonder meet. It's logic wearing a disguise of awe. It's math humming a lullaby to the soul. And that brings us back to the simplest point. Look around you. A flower, a building, a song on the radio, the face of someone you love. All of them are math in motion. Ratios, rhythms, fractals, symmetries, and also glorious imperfections. The universe is endlessly solving equations, and the solutions happen to be beautiful. So next time you stare at the stars or listen to music, or even admire the way foam patterns in your morning coffee, remember, you're watching numbers dance. You're listening to math sing. You're seeing order and chaos waltz together. And maybe, just maybe, that's the secret. The universe is one big lullaby written in math, a song of ratios and rhythms, imperfections and surprises. And we, lucky creatures that we are, get to fall asleep to it.